Alright, Sonic the Hedgehog 3. Honest review. Let's do it. Alright, so for this movie, I'm going to go through the pros and the cons and then give my rating on the movie. Fair enough? Fair enough. So for the pros of this movie, we have a very strong story. Very cohesive, very put together, very obvious central theme that focuses on not letting pain and anger and rage change you. And this is pretty well displayed with the various characters throughout the movie. Now another example of a movie that did this but not quite as well is Spider-Man 3, though it's not as bad as people would think. Now if you take a close look at the themes of these two films, you'll actually notice that they are very much the same and that Sonic 3 is like a more put together version of Spider-Man 3. I do feel like Spider-Man 3 has some advantages over this movie though, because Sonic 3 leans so much into the kiddie vibe that you can't really get the pain and anger and rage component across as strongly as you can in a movie like Spider-Man 3, where characters can become completely unhinged.
You know what? I'll ask the questions, new hedgehog. Who are you? Why do you look like me?
This is a waste of time. Walk away before you get hurt.
Good riddance.
No. He despised you. You were an embarrassment to him.
Setting that aside, I do have to admit that Sonic 3 handles this theme in a much more put together way, even though some of the power is lacking due to them limiting how anger is displayed to cater to the kids. That being said, very well done on that aspect of the story. Amazing work putting it all together. Absolutely fantastic work. One of my favorite parts of the movie. Another pro is that the character arcs are completed. Whether a person chooses to remain on that path of anger or chooses to leave that behind and go towards the better option of overcoming that pain and anger so it doesn't change who they are, each character's arc is completed. On top of that, there are very nice sub-arcs littered throughout the movie, like what the true meaning of family is through Gerald's rejection of Eggman and Eggman's subsequent acknowledgement of Dr. Stone. These are some of the more poignant arcs, and in my opinion, they bump the movie up at least 1 point on the rating scale. Another pro is all of the references to former Sonic media throughout the movie. Whether it be characters doing certain poses, or certain songs playing in the background like Crush 40's Live and Learn, these are all nice additions for the more die-hard Sonic fans. Always remember that one of the cardinal rules of writing is to give the audience what they want. In this case, the audience has a lot of what they want, and that's a very good thing. Now the final pro I'll talk about is the climax of the movie. Now the climax of the movie is amazingly well handled. One of the best I've ever seen, almost giving off Matrix-like vibes in terms of being able to resolve everything at the exact same time. This is actually a very strong thing, and the movie has to be given credit for ending on such a spectacularly high note. Now the benefit of this type of ending is that the viewer gets to enjoy the emotional high that comes from every plot thread being resolved in a satisfying way at the exact same time. This is why I compared it to The Matrix. For those who have seen The Matrix, spoiler alert for those who haven't, we know that when we reach the end of the movie, everything is resolved with Trinity and Neo. Neo realizes he's the one, the bad guys get defeated, and everything happens one after another. This leads to an overwhelming high for the viewer because they get everything they want at the exact same time. And as I said before, one of the cardinal rules of writing is to give the audience what they want. How much more spectacular is it to give the audience everything they want at the exact same time? So the climax of this movie was amazingly well done. Congratulations to the writers on that. Now for the cons.
Crime!
No, not those cons. And before I get into this, the cons are going to take a little bit longer to go through because it takes longer to explain what is wrong with a thing than it does to congratulate what is good. That being said, for the cons, the movie can feel a bit too kiddie. That's not to say that I think all of the kiddiness was a bad thing, just that it was too much. Now this may seem like a surface level problem at first glance, but it can actually hurt the story in a very great deal of ways. The first way that comes to mind is that this lingering air of kiddiness makes it so that scenes that should be intense are not as intense as they should be, because the comedy and lighthearted tone invasively pervades the movie.
Why are you running away? We were just getting started!
The more you talk, the harder I want to hit you.
For those familiar with Marvel's Captain America Civil War, note that when the big airport fight starts going down, there's a scene inserted between Hawkeye and Black Widow to dispel some of the tension by having them joke with each other. And this is presumably done to relieve some of the tension, as the magnitude at which the Avengers are fighting is quite jarring.
We're still friends, right?
Depends on how hard you hit me.
Now, when you're seeking to really remove tension from a story in certain moments like this to keep things a bit more lighthearted, this isn't such a bad idea. But when this tool is used too much, or a story format is built in a way that caters very heavily towards doing this, or an author is unaware that cracking a joke at a certain point in time does this, the story can suffer greatly for it because the story can't be taken seriously. So in reality, what we have here is a missed opportunity, because Sonic 3 could have taken advantage of the fact that Shadow is one of the more mature characters in Sonic media and used that to create a more diverse variety of dynamics between the characters. And this leads me to the second con. Shadow suffers from the writer's attempt to integrate him into this more kid-like Sonic environment. Now to see what I mean here, just think Joss Whedon's Batman. Got that picture? Good. Now listen to this joke he made.
Yeah. Oh, something is definitely bleeding.
Now to put a long story short, the reason this joke doesn't work is because everyone has their own comedic style, including Batman. So the formula of giving everyone a comedic air as if you're writing the Avengers 2.0 doesn't work with him, because he has a very different comedic style than everyone else.
Can you fly?
In a plane.
Wait, you're not just some guy in a bat costume, are you?
This is why the Batman doesn't laugh or smile at just any joke, and also why he is known as the more serious Justice League member. To give him the same comedic style as everyone else very jarringly breaks his character. In reality, to close off this scene, the Batman would get up, maybe spit out some blood, and get up with a groan. Then, if Alfred makes a joke, he may respond with one of his own. Now what I'll do to demonstrate this is read an alternate interaction here in a book format, and I want you to think about it and see if this crafted interaction doesn't fit the character of the Batman better. Batman groans, pushing himself off the ground and looking to the side as he spits out a mouthful of blood. Alfred gets off the Batjet and stares at his wounded side as he gets to his feet. You know, Monster Bruce, if I were you, I would have brought out the big gun before he left me with a cracked rib. Batman huffs a small smile. Now where's the fun in that? So you see, when writing characters, you have to keep in mind the truths and realities about that character's personality to make sure that you don't accidentally break them because you're trying to be funny or cool or something else. Unfortunately, I feel like this is exactly what happened to Shadow, which is why he made jokes like,
You're a colorful bunch. The more you talk, the harder I want to hit you.
Come on, Shadow. Got fresh avocados in the crab. We'll make guac.
Revenge guac.
and it's only aggravated by Sonic making a joke every 0.01 seconds.
Who are you? Why do you look like me? Why are you running away? We were just getting started.
Yikes. Somebody better call Google Maps.
The more you talk, the harder I want it.
Now, all this being said, I am aware that someone could argue that this iteration of Shadow isn't meant to be as dark as other iterations. But at one point you have to realize that Batman stops being Batman if you take too much away from him. This is why Joss Whedon's Batman wasn't well received. And Shadow also stops being Shadow if you take too much away from him. Now, perhaps there's enough of the core of Shadow here for us to still think of this as Shadow. I'm not trying to discredit that. But the point I'm making is this. When I watch a show like Sonic X, or even Sonic Prime, I don't feel like Shadow is struggling to be Shadow. I feel like he's just Shadow. And maybe this is because those shows didn't go for the overly kiddie tone, or even when they did have that kiddie tone, they allowed Shadow to be something mature, breaking into the kiddie tone. Now, if you've been a Sonic fan for a while, you'll notice this fact that I'm about to state, and that is that in Sonic media, many of the main characters are very lighthearted or kiddie characters, whether it be Sonic, or Tails, or Knuckles to an extent, or Amy, or Cream, or anyone else. But then, within this more kiddie universe, you get characters like Shadow, and characters like Rouge, and these characters are breaking the threshold on extremely mature, and you can usually feel that. I didn't feel like I could feel that from Shadow as much in this movie. He felt like he was in the Sonic universe, but not as the same Shadow I'm used to. Rather, he was a bit of a toned down version meant to be more friendly for the kids. But that leads me to my third con. By trying to appeal to the younger audience, the movie unintentionally did them a disservice. Here's what I mean. Sometimes a kid needs to see something real, not something that's been put through a kiddie filter. And that's to say that a kid would benefit more from seeing the mature version of Shadow than they did this kiddie version of him. Here's why. If we're really trying to teach kids about life, which is obviously what the movie is trying to do by teaching them not to let pain and anger change them, then why are we protecting kids from the reality of what pain and anger looks like? Wouldn't it benefit the kid to see the real version of anger and not some kiddified version? I mean, Shadow was so kiddified that I feel like the angriest moment I ever saw from a character in this movie was from Sonic when they were fighting on the moon. In what reality is Sonic angrier than Shadow? And how does that even make sense seeing as Tom is alive and Maria's dead? Let the kids see the reality. Someone who gets hit with a trauma as hard as Shadow did doesn't smile, or at least they don't smile often. Think about it. Characters like the Batman are notorious for being super serious and uptight. But where does this come from? It comes from their response to their trauma. And it most certainly isn't realistic to have a character like Shadow smiling when the trauma is still fresh. Bruce's trauma runs so deep that even years later as Batman, his character is still deeply affected.
Circumstances aside, it was kind of enjoyable to be a kid again.
I haven't been a kid since I was 8 years old.
Also look at a character like Magneto in X-Men First Class. With his character, we constantly have these incidents where that anger and rage from his childhood expresses itself in very violent ways. And this happens because even though so much time has passed, that anger and rage from that trauma is still there. It just needs an opportunity to manifest itself. Shadow barely had any time to grieve what had happened to Maria and was put into cryosleep. Then he emerges and is somehow able to crack a joke as he trades blows with Sonic. Now, this may seem insignificant, but the small difference is what makes this Shadow feel a little less real than the Shadow in something like Sonic X. That Shadow grinned, but we never got the sense that he was grinning because he was losing his serious edge. He was always grinning because he was either having an interaction that elicited a grin as an appropriate response, like when he first meets Sonic and sees how much they look alike, or he was a bit on the other side of his character arc, and because of that he could now smile a bit more. And to back up this point, I just want to ask everyone who's a bit older a question. When you look back at movies where there was either this crazy villain, and the movie was a bit serious for a kid's movie, do you look back on it with fear and feel traumatized, or do you look back on it and smile? I mean, I've even seen people come from shows like Thomas the Tank Engine and say that they were massively scared of Dieselton as a kid, but they love coming back and watching him because he was just an interesting character. And a more mature Shadow would not be anywhere near being as scary as a Diesel 10.
As long as she exists, so do the others. But if she can be destroyed...
Destroyed? Did you say destroy?
D word.
Like hurt?
Yeah, destroyed. Hello, Twinkle Toes. I got a plan, and you're not in it. Say hello to Peachy. Okay, Twinkle Toes. I know about the buffers.
What are we gonna do? We'll think of something.
That's it.
All of that to say that sometimes the kid needs to be allowed to see a picture of true evil that hasn't been toned down too much. We are trying to prepare them for life after all, where true evil exists. And in Shadow's case, it's not even a picture of true evil that we need to show, because Shadow isn't just some evil character. We need to show them a picture of anger and rage. Now the next issue is that the serious theme is undermined by the kiddiness of the movie. And it may sound like I'm saying the same thing twice, but I'm not, and here's why. The theme of this movie is not allowing pain and anger or rage or a desire for vengeance to change who you are. And this is a very good theme. But this is a very serious theme as well, and the kiddiness of the movie does not allow that to be fleshed out. Think about it. Anger and rage and a desire for vengeance is a very strong thing. And whenever it manifests on the big screen or in real life, it looks a lot more extreme than this kiddie version presented in Sonic 3. And because we have to tone Shadow down to this kiddie version of himself, we lose that rage and anger component that would make the theme stronger. In every other piece of Sonic media, think to yourself about how mad Shadow actually is at the world for what happened to Maria.
It's useless. I made a promise to Maria and I'm keeping it.
Shadow, getting revenge won't bring Maria back.
So what?
How can you blame people alive today for things that happened 50 years ago? Can't you see it's not fair?
Don't talk to me about fair! Not after what happened here!
This is from Sonic X, when Chris is trying to convince Shadow to save the world in a scenario fairly similar to the one in Sonic 3. Note that rage and anger makes it so that Shadow is not mildly open to the idea of saving the world and doing the right thing, like he is in Sonic 3. He is completely against it, and he has to be very aggressively convinced to let this anger go to the point where he cries when he finally does. And this is because anger is a mask for immense pain. But we don't believe there's immense pain when the person is less angry. When the person is less angry, we assume that the pain is less, or that it is a wound that is perhaps partially healed. And there are many examples of anger done right in cinema, and notice as the examples go by that the anger always reaches an extremely high point, either manifesting during the moment of vengeance or popping up in isolated incidents along the way. And why do these isolated incidents happen? Because the truth is that those types of characters are always angry. They just need a trigger and all that anger will run people over. So Shadow doesn't give off this vibe, and I prefer incarnations where before his redemption, he is full send on that vengeance/cold indifference path. And as much as it may sound strange to say, Shadow needs some of the edginess that some people complain about him having. Why? Because that edginess lends itself to the anger and rage component. Think of a character like Magneto in X-Men First Class. Do we call him edgy because he's looking like this as he's pushing a coin through a man's brain to kill him? No, he's just angry. And we only run into problems in writing when we use more edginess than the anger would call for. That's where we start to have a problem with Shadow's character. But anger and rage comes with an appropriate edginess, and you can't really get around that. This Shadow from the Shadow the Hedgehog game gets it. Maybe he gets it a little too much, I'll give that. But the Shadow from Sonic X gets it much better. Also note that keeping everything in this one-dimensional kiddie space actually ends up hurting characters and the story in the long run. This is another con, and a pretty big one, because one of the most interesting things in the Sonic franchise is the dynamics between characters. But when you impose this kiddie nature on every character in varying degrees, you inevitably lose some of those dynamics because now everyone is the same. Look at it this way. In Sonic media, there's a progression of maturity. You have the more innocent characters like Cream and Amy. Then you have innocent and slightly more mature characters like Tails and Sonic. Then you have characters that are a bit more serious like the Sonic X version of Knuckles. And though these characters are more serious, they still hang out with the characters that are a bit more innocent every now and then. But then you start to get into the realm of very mature characters, like Rouge, who even though they sometimes work with the more innocent characters, have much more experience about getting through life and who also have their own agendas. Then you have the super mature characters, like Shadow the Hedgehog. And these characters are usually the way they are because they have suffered very intense life traumas. Now the trend that is starting to appear in the Sonic movies is that everything and everyone falls into this more kiddie vibe. And what happens is that in making everything kiddie, you unintentionally end up distorting and erasing what would have been very interesting dynamics. And you also lose the benefits of those dynamics. You see, in writing, you often want to give your audience a good amount of diversity, because diversity has a high capacity for keeping things interesting. But when everything gets put through this kiddie filter, diversity is lost because everything and everyone is basically the same. Put it this way. In Sonic X, I can enjoy the innocence of Cream more because it gets contrasted to the darkness of Shadow. And I can enjoy the darkness of Shadow more because it gets contrasted to the suaveness of Rouge. And I can enjoy the maturity of Rouge more because it gets contrasted to the innocence of Tails. And yes, she really did kiss him here, and it was hilarious. And the list goes on. But the problem in the Sonic live action movie series is that everyone is kind of in the same area. And even if they should be in a different area, it feels like they're still in that same kiddie area because everything is so toned down. So we have this kiddie version of Knuckles where he's not a serious guardian of the Master Emerald who's in between that innocent and mature range, Rather, he's this kind of kiddie addition to the family that speaks funny because he's from another world with a different language, kind of even adopting a Thor speech pattern where he calls Donut Lord Lord of the Donuts.
I don't think you've been completely honest with me.
Know this, son of Cole.
And as an aside, this interpretation of Knuckles is perpetuating a very unfortunate misunderstanding of Knuckles as a dumb character. And guess what? Those interesting dynamics from if he's a bit more smart and mature, dead. And guess what they're replaced with? More of the same kiddie dynamics that are all over the movie because everyone is the same. And mark my words, I as an author catch on to these bad trends early because I'm analyzing it deeper due to my experience. And those watching now may disagree with me and say it's not that big a deal. But eventually, the audience catches on too. So maybe by movie 4, if the movies continue to stay in that kiddie range, or maybe when Rouge pops up as a shadow of herself and the IDW version blows her out of the water, maybe around that time people will start to scratch their head a bit because they're going to start realizing that things are getting a little old. I'm calling it now. I, and the audience, once they realize this is the case, will be left screaming in frustration, though I'm already screaming a bit now. And if you're still failing to see my point, let's look at the greatest example of this that I can think of, the Avengers. Now, if you look at the Avengers, what you'll notice is that there's a very widespread array of characters with very different personalities and beliefs, and that this creates very interesting and different dynamics. Here's what I mean. Nick Fury, despite being this crazy super spy, is a man of hope, and he hopes in the heroes all around him. He hopes that they will become what the world needs them to be when it needs them to become it. Tony Stark, on the other hand, resists this idea because
we are not soldiers.
So Tony is still struggling with the greatness of this call and the scope and nature of what the Avengers have to do. And we see this more in Iron Man 3, where he is traumatized due to the events of the war in New York. But there are many other dynamics. Tony Stark is an eternal jokester, who doesn't always appear to be taking things very seriously. But this clashes very sharply with Steve Rogers, because he's a more uptight kind of hero who appears to take almost everything seriously. Then we go to someone like Thor, and while the Avengers are having their heated discussion, he says,
Treat your champions with substance trust.
Because he comes from the world where all of your allies are people you champion, and you trust them as a ride or die group. But Nick Fury is from the spy world, where people are assets, so he says, in Civil War, when the team is arguing about whether or not to sign the Accords, Rhodey says to Sam,
Secretary Ross has a Congressional Medal of Honor, which is one more than you have.
Showing he places value on military and country accomplishments. Sam is also a military man, but one less attached to military ideology, because he comes from the experience of dealing with a covert terror organization being alive within a government institution. This truth and the fact that he is also extremely loyal to Captain America makes it so that he is not swayed by Rhodey's arguments. And these dynamics even exist between characters when they're not interacting with each other. Think about it. Loki, when attacking Natasha's mind, insults sentimentality and compares it to a child at prayer.
This is the basest sentimentality. This is a child at prayer. Pathetic.
But earlier in the movie, what do we have?
I'd sit this one out, Cap.
I don't see how I can.
These guys come from legend. They're basically gods.
There's only one god, man. And I'm pretty sure he doesn't dress like that.
And what you have to realize is that many of these moments are created naturally. You just have to allow characters to be themselves and not impose this underlying similarity on every one of them. Put it this way. For those of you familiar with Thomas the Tank Engine, do you think that show would be as interesting if the island of Sodor had 8 Thomases? Or if we want to make it closer to what the Sonic movies are doing, let's say that all of the original characters are still there, but everything that made them special personality-wise was dramatically reduced so that everyone was almost the same. So no cheeky Thomas, no arrogant James boasting about his red paint, no prideful Gordon being the fastest engine on the railway, no put-upon Percy, no arrogant Harold, no wise Edward, no devious Diesel, no fan-favorite Diesel 10. And regarding Diesel 10, we already have complaints about this because of how he was watered down within the canon. So hopefully you all can start to see what I'm saying. Variety is the spice of life, as the saying goes. So you have to let characters be themselves. And you can't expect to dilute their character without the narrative suffering a consequence. And usually, the consequence is a weaker, less dynamic story, and that the characters feel a little less like themselves. Now, one last thing. Let's not insult a child's understanding capacity by catering to them to the extent that we unintentionally insult their intelligence. I mean, I feel like I was getting hit by some of these themes the same way Captain America got punched by the Winter Soldier in Captain America 2. And on some of them, I felt like Iron Man getting punched by Thanos. I don't need Shadow's hair to look like Sonic's in a flashback to realize they went through the same type of thing. And kids don't either, especially when we set up a high-level fight between the characters soon after, where the realities come to a head. Now, my review is kinda over at this point, but I have a very important question that I think we all need to ask ourselves along with the studios that are making these movies. And that question is, do we know our audience? I mean, really, do we know who's watching the Sonic movies? At all. And the reason I ask this is because it's like the movie studio is catering to the same age group with every single movie. Now, the first Sonic movie came out around 4 years ago. Let's say a watcher was around 12 years old at that time. By now, they are likely 16 or 17 depending on when their birthday falls. Are we abandoning that age group and only catering to 12-year-olds with every single movie? Or are we also considering the people who are growing up? And beyond that, are we considering those who are already adults who are supporting the movie? I mean, back in the day, even in kiddie movies, little things and details that only made sense to grown-ups were spread out within the movie. And it kind of felt like the writers were saying, we know this may not be your thing, but here's something you can enjoy whenever the kids bug you and make you put on this movie. That is just about completely lost in our modern society, and it's a shame to see. And that's not even to talk about making a kids movie that is a kid and adult movie at the same time, like The Lion King or The Incredibles. That being said, I hope you all enjoyed this review. I really like the Sonic franchise, love all the characters, and I feel like this movie did a lot of things right. But unfortunately, one of the things that I was really looking forward to it doing right, the maturity of Shadow and bringing that into this kiddie world, I feel like they really fumbled. For me personally, the movie is maybe a 7.5 out of 10. I think that in reality, if I set my personal gripes aside, it's maybe closer to an 8 or an 8.5 out of 10. And I think that the rating varies based on whether you're looking at it as a kids movie or an adult movie. As a kids movie, I think it's an 8 or an 8.5 out of 10. As an adult movie, it's maybe a 7 to a 7.5 out of 10. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Feel free to disagree. Comment below to give your thoughts. I do read and respond to them. But that's just where I stand. Maybe you'll give the movie a few more points on the rating scale. Either way, this review has just been my opinion. Alright guys, stay tuned if you're interested in Sonic content in general. One of the videos I have planned will be about what Shadow the Hedgehog teaches us about a villain's character arc. So if that sounds like it'll be fun to you, please do stay connected. Alright people, please like and subscribe, it really helps the channel. And I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.